Rachel Emmanuel brings the news each day. On Alberta Roundup, she has her say.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Alberta Roundup. I'm your host, Rachel Emmanuel. Today, I am joined by one of the Coutts Three. Alex Van Herk last week, Wednesday, was found guilty of mischief over $5,000 for his role in the Coutts border blockade. He joins us now. Nice to see you, Alex.
Good afternoon. Nice to meet you, Rachel, and happy to be on here with you.
So as I mentioned, this case has been ongoing for a while. We got the results of that. A jury of peers down in a Lethbridge court found you and your two other colleagues guilty for your involvement in the Coutts border blockade. Just wondering, right now, how are you feeling?
So I guess to some degree, quite shocked, I guess. I mean, to some degree, I guess we knew kind of what was coming for the fact of what happened. I mean, if you look at the charge itself, of the mischief charge, it's pretty broad. So anybody that was with that, they could have picked out of there in that lineup would have been found guilty. So 20,000 people participated in Coutts blockade and in Coutts protest. So had they have picked anyone there, looking at how the judge had laid out his charges to the jury, they would have found anyone guilty of that. So it's pretty tough to fight a mischief charge, which is actually a scary thought, because that gives them pretty wide opening as they can charge anybody and find them guilty under mischief, under that section 430.
So you and the other gentleman, you now face up to 10 years in prison for this charge. That sentencing hasn't come. It's expected later this summer. Do you know when you guys might receive that sentencing?
So our what they call pretrial sentencing is in July 22nd. And then I'm not 100% certain how that works, but I believe that's when they kind of discuss what we can, who we are, what our businesses are, to give the information to the judge. And then I believe they're looking at sentencing somewhere in September. And according to our lawyers, he says it could go anywhere from 6 months up to 10 years. And the scary part is they want to make an example of us. And there's a lot of things that kind of lead me to thinking that it could be worse than better, is the fact that we had put an application in our pretrial application for the judge to notify the jury of what they call a verdict nullification. And it hasn't been used too often. I believe the last time it was used in Canada was in 1982 with Dr. Morgenthaler. And even though I don't really agree with what the use of it was for there, was he was doing abortions, and they found him guilty of murder, but because of what he was doing, they overruled it and found him not guilty. And it dates back actually to, I believe, 1860. It was used in England. A pastor there was given a sermon, and at that time the king had allowed only 5 congregants to be under that pastor, and he had like a full house. And they found him guilty of the king's order, but the jury said it was wrong what he did, but for the righteous reasons, they overruled it. And then the king actually locked up the jurors for 3 days without food and water until that whole city, I'm trying to remember the name of the city it was, but where they overruled it, and that's where that actually law came into play. So we had hoped that our judge would have allowed that, especially in our case, because we weren't there for ourselves. We weren't there for a group of people. We were there for all Albertans and all Canadians fighting a tyrannical government and tyrannical mandates that were in place to be freed from it. So we were hoping that he would look at that and give that opportunity, but it didn't happen.
So when you actually talk about why you were there, your words echo that of your lawyer Michael Johnston. He said that you essentially were there out of you wanted to protect those with whom you share a similar political ideology. And in a Globe and Mail report, they actually said that your name specifically, quote, rarely showed up in RCMP's notes. So given that, especially that latter note, that your name wasn't really found too often in RCMP notes when they were prosecuting this case, do you think that you will receive a lesser sentence than the others that are being prosecuted, or do you think that you will all receive the same sentence?
I'm hoping, I guess, that I would get a lesser sentence, but looking at it, at my involvement in there, I mean, I was there, I participated alongside the other ones, and they still found us guilty pretty quick. Like, the decision when they gave the verdict on each one of us was just as fast on all three of us. And a matter of fact, when my guilty verdict came in, my lawyer, Michael Johnston, asked that the jury be polled, which I've never seen before, but they individually asked every juror what their verdict was, and each one of them was pretty quick to respond guilty. So I'm not sure how to judge whether he's going to look at my involvement in it or just of the fact of the guilty verdict.
So as my audience likely knows by now, I had the chance to interview Alberta Premier Danielle Smith last weekend. That exclusive interview aired on Saturday, and I was able to ask her to respond to this guilty verdict, and I asked her whether or not she was surprised. She said that there is never a reason to block critical infrastructure, including political ideology. We're going to play that clip for my audience now. Taking a look at the Coutts Three, I know you said this is separate from my branch of government, the judicial branch is separate, and you don't want to make too many comments on that. I'm going to respect that. However, just one question on it. The jury made their decision. It was a guilty verdict on Tuesday night. We obviously are expecting the sentencing could be up to 10 years in prison for those three men. That'll come this summer. They did make their decision rather quickly. Were you surprised by that? They made it about a couple hours.
Mm-hmm. It was, what I would say is that the legislation that we have in place for Critical Infrastructure Act, it doesn't matter what your ideology is or what your cause is or what your political perspective is. You simply cannot block critical infrastructure. I don't support Extinction Rebellion gluing themselves to the bridges. I don't support days of action that shut down our railway lines, and I don't support inconveniencing neighbors and farmers and those who want to get goods transported by shutting down borders and highways. And I think that this is a caution. There's a way to be able to make your point known. There's a way to be able to advocate, but you can't block critical infrastructure.
Alex, what's your response to this?
Well, I see it again. I listened to it on Saturday, and it's like, I'm appalled. We weren't there for ideology, right? We weren't for certain ideology. We were there fighting the tyrannical government that was imposing illegal mandates, which have been proven now through that Ingram decision. So I'm saying there was no personal gain out of this. I'm shocked if it was critical infrastructure, if they want to charge us under the Critical Infrastructure Act, there is a law in place for that we could have been charged under, but they chose explicitly to use mischief to set a precedence, I believe, for future protesters to never protest again. If they give us a heavy enough sentence and charge us under mischief, is going to deter any future protesting from taking place. I mean, it's sad that she's labeling us as a certain group or a certain ideology. We sure as heck weren't there for that. We were there for all Albertans fighting tyranny and illegal mandates that they were imposing on us.
So we know that Premier Smith, when she was immediately elected, she said that she had actually initially hoped to grant amnesty or clemency for people charged for breaching COVID-19 restrictions. Later on, at the beginning of the January 2023, she came back and said, actually, I've looked into it and this is something I'm not able to do. Just the way that our systems are designed here in Canada, I don't have the power to legally grant anyone amnesty. Often when I cover this story, I see people in the comments saying the Premier needs to get those people off. She needs to grant them clemency. What do you personally think about this? Do you think that there is a way for her to grant you clemency, or have you accepted that she doesn't have the power to do that?
Well, and there's two sides to it. I understand that she maybe doesn't have the power to, but she does. She has to look at what was happening in our country at the time and the mistakes that the government had made. And I feel that she has to say, you know what, based on what was happening under Jason Kenney's rule, that it was being done illegally, which forced good citizens to have to participate in such a thing to force their hand, I guess, in dropping these mandates. I know our judicial system is separate from our political system. I understand that. And it sets a precedence to, I guess, for further groups or anything to say, well, if they can get away with it, then we can, down the road, you'll see all kinds of groups doing these kind of measures and civil disobedience. But I believe this was outside of any group or personal gain. This was fighting the tyrannical government, which she agreed with. She said Coutts needed to happen to stop what was happening in our province and country at that time. And she publicly said that. And now to retract that, saying, you know what, I believe there's a way that she could have, even if she would have said that she couldn't agree with the blocking of it, but she agreed with the stand that we took on it, fighting against the tyranny that was happening.
Something else I have to ask you is, some conservatives might make the argument of law and order. I personally wouldn't make that argument myself, but they might say this is just a case of law and order. But even if we were to take that argument for what it is, there's also so many cases of people committing much worse crimes and being let off for much more, and not to even mention the catch and release system that we have going on. So how do you feel about that? Just sort of what seems to be unfairness of it all, of you guys being prosecuted for this, and we have actual violent criminals who are back out on the streets in no time.
And you're 100% right, because they had an opportunity to charge us there again under that Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, which was implemented, I believe, in 2018 when the train tracks were blocked by the natives in Ontario. And that's when or maybe it was Northern Alberta, I can't remember where it was, but they brought that Infrastructure Act in place for that. And if she would have had that opportunity to speak to Mickey Amory, our Minister of Justice, to say, hey, you stop these charges of mischief, charge them under the Infrastructure Act, because she was well aware of what we were charged with, but she chose to still allow this to go through. So it tells me that she had no intention of trying to get us off of this.
When we talk about what the Premier is able to do, we know that she had asked her Justice Minister to look into the charges about COVID-19, see if there was cases of reasonable prosecution. Later, she received an ethics violation for that. The ethics commissioner said she should not have had those conversations with her Justice Minister. So even despite that ruling, you still think there's more she could have done?
Yes, I do believe there's more that she could have done, maybe not directly outside, but behind the scenes, to, had the Justice Minister look at it and say, hey, you know what, I'm not allowed to interfere, but you know what, maybe drop the charges from mischief to critical infrastructure, give us a fine where it wouldn't have affected anybody and it wouldn't have changed nothing, and nobody would have known the difference whether she was involved or not, because it would have been a separate leg. But she could have just said, hey, can you get these charges changed? She has that power and ability to do so.
Alex, you said that you can expect to see that sentencing in September. How are you spending these next few months until we have that amount, what the actual sentencing is going to be?
Well, it's going to be tough for me. Like I run not a large scale operation, but we feed about 7,000 head. I have 7 kids and 9 grandkids, 3 more on their way. Within the next 6-8 weeks here, I'll have 3 more grandkids. So to depends on the length of the sentencing, but I have a lot to switch over to my kids, to put this weight on them. We run 350 cow-calf pairs. We farm about 2,500 acres. And yeah, to be able to all of a sudden let all that go for something I felt that we stood up for all Albertans and all Canadians. And I would like to hope and see that Albertans now are going to stand up and lobby against our Premier and ask the Premier to somehow do something to stop what's happening, because this is not justice. It's, how do you word it? I guess legally we were guilty, but morally we weren't.
Alex, thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.
To the rest of our audience, we'll be back on Saturday with our regular programming. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe to True North and like this video. I hope that you all have a great week, and God bless.